So the big question tonight, and I hope it doesn't fry your brain too much, can your company, maybe even a brand, turn around its public image? Could VW make a comeback from cheating on emissions testing, for example? It is still one of the biggest selling marques in South Africa. After the hack that leaked the personal details of over 500 million subscribers, would you ever open a Yahoo account? And after the second time in as many years of allegations of bribery and corruption, would you buy Pinnacle shares? This is the MoneyMakers. I'm Bruce Whitfield, and I'm joined by advisor and brand expert Jeremy Sampson this evening. Brands can be restored, but there's always a niggle in the back of your mind as to whether or not anything they say is true, Jeremy.
There's a lovely chart that's produced every year out of the States, which is about brands on death row. And when you actually think back, the brands that have disappeared in the last few years, and there have been quite a few. Think of the Kodaks, the Nokias, and people like that.
Soon to be BlackBerry, I suspect.
And BlackBerry owned by RIM,
yes.
Research in Motion, which most people have never heard of. But it's a difficult job, and with all the competition and all the difficulties today, once you've actually, it's like a cracked plate. Will you actually keep a cracked plate? No, you often throw it away in the end. So a brand, reputation, once cracked, it's very difficult to bring it back.
Yahoo, Marissa Mayer, she came in as the great white knight, if you like, of Yahoo. They've gone through troubles of their own, and surely, I mean, I didn't realize they still existed, but apparently they do for how much longer?
Well, there it's getting worse. You know, reading about things that she was aware of 3-4 months ago and managed to keep the lid on them largely, I believe, and now talking about all these leaks, talking what's going on, and of course they are subject to a takeover. Well, will that carry on, or will it grind to a halt? So they seem to be getting into worse and worse difficulties at the moment, and quite bluntly, how are they ever going to get out of that? Because of course there are different kinds of problems. Here, one of her problems is that confidentiality has been breached, and you never pull that back. Once it's out, it's there forever. If
you're in the internet business, security is your primary function. I mean, it's absolutely pivotal. I'm absolutely certain of that. Now, Jeremy, when we look at, I mean, you talk about the CEO knowing stuff. Now, Pinnacle is such an interesting one. Pinnacle Technologies, 18 months, 2 years ago, went through a trying time. The share price virtually halved when it emerged that one of its executive directors had been only accused of bribing a senior police general, offering a bribe. The case was eventually struck off the roll. It didn't ever go to court, and it all went away, and slowly Pinnacle started building up. There's always been a niggle. This time round, Pinnacle preempted any crisis and said, do you know what, our name's been mentioned in the case of an army general in the fraud and corruption for serious crimes court in Pretoria. Did the company do the right thing? Because they're CEOs who know stuff, who keep a lid on things. New CEO comes in, an event possibly related to the same sort of period as the executive director and the police general, this with an army general, and goes, hands up, we're not accused of doing anything wrong, but you might see our name out in the public domain. Share price gets smashed anyway, and he was doing the right thing.
But when happens once, okay.
Once is an accident, twice is unlucky, third is deliberate.
Exactly. And
So
that's what we're looking at here,
yes.
Because there are huge similarities in the case. And these things do take time to emerge. So as you're saying, allegedly, but and then I saw quite by accident that they're actually changing the name of Pinnacle Holdings. They're changing their name. There was a notice of general meeting or something going to change it to Alviva. Well, Alviva, Pinnacle. Let's watch this space.
Yeah, and so often companies think that a name change will solve the problem, but there are enough people with enough years of experience in the wings looking for the next crisis, looking for the next opportunity to breach the fortress that is the corporate identity.
Well, what we know about Pinnacle at the moment is that they have a problem that's come up now twice. They haven't cleaned house. As you say, they've learnt from the first instance.
All they did was outsource the problem, because what they used to do was incentivize people in-house to do their sales. Then they got burned, so now they've outsourced the problem. It's only a question of time if the culture and the policy has not been altered adequately enough to address the root cause of the problem.
So that's when you stop the music, you clean house. Once you've cleaned house, and that might take a long time and it might be quite painful because these things take time to come to the surface, you keep on apologizing, and then you're in a position to say, right, where to now? And if that name is too damaged, only then do you change it.
How often does a company apologize without looking vulnerable, weak, and incapable of it sorting itself out?
Well, I remember Santi Borta in her MTN days, and I don't know if we're going to talk MTN, but when she was there as CMO, she used to say, after you've apologized once, apologize a second time. But that's it.
When it comes to Volkswagen and its crisis of confidence, particularly in the United States, where it was lying and cheating and was underhand skullduggery in terms of lying about how filthy its car's engines were. Maybe that's a little bit extreme. They lied about the emissions. That brand damage globally is still very, very strong. It's still in the top 3 sellers in South Africa. Toyota number 1, VW number 2, and I think Ford number 3. In South Africa, we kind of forgiven the emissions scandal. Worldwide, though?
Worldwide, it still is a huge problem, especially in the States. Some people say it's become a political football as well, because the American automotive industry needs all the help it can get. But you think last week, now this is what, a year on or so from the first emissions scandal announcements. Last week, the chief engineer of Audi was forced to resign. So it's going on. And this is where the same with BP when they had the leakage in Gulf of Mexico. Now, you try and close it down, you try and close it down, you try and close it down, but it keeps on seeping out and seeping out. And with Volkswagen, remember, it's not just Volkswagen, Audi, Seat, Porsche. Who's been tainted, who hasn't? But this is perhaps the strength of a global brand. Whereas you're quite right, in South Africa they seem to be very strong. Whereas in places like Switzerland, it's almost verboten. Now,
you talk about Switzerland. Tony Hayward, does that name ring a bell? Ex-chief executive of BP at the
chairman
time.
Of Glencore.
Chairman of Glencore. I was at Davos. It was either this year or last year. I think it must have been this year. Having a little coffee inside the hallowed halls of the World Economic Forum in Davos, where nobody's supposed to rock the boat too hard. Having a coffee, and next to me I go, isn't it? Is. No, it can't be. There's Tony Hayward. And as I'm about to go, hey, Tone, a reporter from the FT comes up to him and he quickly brushes the reporter from the FT aside. I'm not talking about that or anything else. Please leave me alone. And in WEF world, you don't rock the boat. So Tony Hayward is allowed to saunter through there without too much of a challenge. But personal reputations get damaged in these things as well, because everybody always wants to talk about, have you spent enough time on your yacht, Mr. Hayward, for example?
Well, the way he was photographed at the beginning of that BP scandal, where he'd flown back for the weekend, I think it was the first weekend he'd had off in about 3 weeks, and he was photographed on one of these huge millionaires' sailing yachts, sitting as part of the crew and the prow of it, and got photographed. And of course that got splashed everywhere. You feel a little bit sorry for him at times, but let's face it, when you're a captain of industry of that scale, whatever you say, whenever you say it, even if it's off the record, is never off the record.
Can the Guptas ever bounce back in South Africa in terms of reputation? They were a little-known family, the profile rising in recent years as they've made more and more public high-profile acquisitions, particularly in the media space. And in the last year, they've had a particularly rough ride in terms of unproven allegations of state capture, and also, of course, they went public with the fact that all their bank accounts were suspended. Not necessarily the smartest thing in the world to do when you are fighting a rearguard action on your personal reputation, but they thought they could pull political strings in order to get those bank accounts reinstated and reopened. Do they have a reputational fallback zone? They've hired some of the toughest anti-muckrakers in the world to try and improve their reputations.
Well, Lobel, as you say, is helping them out of London, who have a lot of experience of this. I have to say this is a very complicated one, because they still seem to have a lot of their business interests. They're still ideally placed in a lot of places. Do they have the patronage at the top? And I think this is where we're talking about reputation linked to other personalities in high places. Now, we hear all the rumours that they have left the country or whatever, but their business interests are very much here. Their fingers are still in a lot of pies. And I think perhaps this is a bit like an iceberg. We're seeing what's on the surface, but there's still a lot underneath that we're still not aware of.
When your business is dependent on consumers and customers, your reputation matters a lot more. Your public reputation matters a lot more than if you are dependent on the largesse or your largesse on just a handful of benefactors.
Absolutely. And this is where you've got to differentiate between business to business, business to consumer. Do you like the company you keep, who you associate with? These are sort of things, and still beware of unintended consequences. You know, people who worked with the Guptas over the last few years have probably done very nicely in many ways. But what about in a couple of years, perhaps 5 years' time? And that's where it could come back and bite.
You mentioned Santi Botha earlier when she was the Chief Marketing Officer at MTN, and when things go wrong, apologise again and then stop. Has MTN apologised to Nigeria for stiffing them on FICA?
Do you want to rephrase that? Because what's going on there as well, it doesn't seem to be over.
No.
No, everyone seems to align that story with the fact that Nigeria has almost got the begging bowl out at the moment because of the price of oil, etc., and the way their economy is down. So they've got some said, perhaps unfairly, almost an easy target. Perhaps South Africa should look at some overseas companies that we see as overseas targets to help us out at the moment.
No. No, but MTN Nigeria is in a spot of bother, which taints the whole of MTN. They've just had a downgrade this week. The share is trading at multi-year lows. It's a huge amount of pressure. New executive team, new talent coming through. Rob Shooter will come in and will take over the business at some point in the next 6 to 8 months. Perhaps he'll be able to clean the slate.
But again, you've got to put MTN in perspective. People forget 22 countries. You're trading in Iran, in Syria, in Yemen, Afghanistan, and Nigeria. So their expertise after whatever it is, 23 years or so, in managing these sort of situations. But yes, they've taken a huge hit. And is that the end of it? Well, as we see with most of these things, the end is not the end. It seems to dribble on.
Oh, I've got to ask you about one more person. I've got to ask you one more brand, one more reputation. Here's Julius Malema, who built his reputation on being the good guy and the face of evil, and he chose his target as Jacob Zuma. Once Jacob Zuma goes, does Julius Malema have an independent streak left in him? He's already been implying this week in a TV interview that after 2019, when things are more settled, he may very well go back to the ANC. It's his choice, not theirs. He seems to be very keen to be building a post-Zuma future.
Well, no, he's a young man and he's planning for the future, as we should all do. Perhaps he has a point, but he has his options. And since being exited from the ANC, if I can put it that way, he's actually built a political party, the EFF, of significance, of huge significance, in a very short time. I can't think of anyone else who's helped do that. And yes, he's got some very able lieutenants, if I can call them that. So full marks to him, whether you like him or not. If we started talking about Donald Trump, whether you like him or not, he's achieved greatly. And not that I'm comparing Malema and Trump, but what he's done is amazing. And that means he actually has built up equity in his own brand, in his own ability, which I'm sure he'll be able to trade, perhaps, as you say, a couple of years' time.
When you said full marks, do you mean M-A-R-K-S or M-A-R-X?
How are we going to spell this one?
Exactly, how are we going to spell this one? Let's not dispel any rumours. There we go. Jeremy Sampson, thank you very much. The advisor, the brand expert, Jeremy Sampson, going through a shopping list of brands that have found themselves in a spot of bother in recent years. Some are restoring their reputations and, of course, rebuilding brands, but some brands are doomed and will go to the dustbin of history, like so many before them. If you get it wrong, the public is a very tough taskmaster. For now, though, sleep well and be conscious of what your brand really is all about. Till next time, bye-bye.